Assalamualaikum. Hi everyone. In the previous video, you must realize that I talk about radiation emitted. So in this case, I'm going to explain the radiation emitted can be in a form of emission spectra. They can be into two spectra. The first one is continuous spectra and the second one is line spectra. So you must know by the end of this video how to differentiate between these two spectra. Let's go to the continuous spectrum, where this spectrum consists all wavelengths components of the visible portion for electromagnetic spectrum that are present. So you have to know that unbroken sequence of frequency also included in this spectrum. This spectrum is produced by incandescent solids, liquids, and compressed gases. An example that we can see from continuous spectrum in these beautiful rainbow colors of spectrum. So you have to know how this spectrum can be formed. First thing first, I'm going to tell you a story where the sunlight passes through this narrow slit and glass prism behind it, so that it can separate into spectrum based on this screen. So at this point, various components of light spread into rainbow color because they got different wavelength. And this spectrum is continuous spectrum because each color merges into the next without taking any break. That's why you have a whole beautiful rainbow color on the screen. So if you want to understand more about the wavelength and frequency based on electromagnetic spectrum of continuous spectrum, you have to know that at the top in unit of nanometer, this value is referring to the wavelength. Another term that we can also use for the wavelength is lambda. This is the symbol for lambda. And the next one you have the bottom one, these all values is referring to the frequency. This is because the units for frequency is per second and the symbol will be V. Now settle for continuous spectrum. I'm going to talk about line spectrum. So this is example for line emission spectrum for hydrogen atoms. So you can see that the background is in black color and you got a few lines with selected special colors on it. So let's go to, so what are line spectrum? Line spectrum consists of discontinuous and discrete lines. That's why you can see that a separate different color of lines, not the merged one like in continuous spectrum. This is because line spectrum is produced by excited atom and ions as the electrons fall back to a lower energy level. At this point, the energy of electron is released. So the radiation emitted at only a specific wavelength or frequency. Last but not least, each line you should know that corresponds to a specific value for its wavelength and its frequency. This is the value that you need to find out later on. So now I'm going to tell you the formation of the line spectrum. You can see that the discharge tube here, where a gas is filled into this discharge tube. After that, an electric spark is passed through the gas in the tube. Energy supply is then absorbed by the electron and causes them to be promoted from ground states to higher energy levels. So these electrons are very unstable at their excited states, then fall to lower energy levels altogether by emitting light at particular wavelength. So this light is the images that form from here that we call as spectral lines. So I concise here the formation of line spectrum into 5 bullet points here. So in order for you to give the difference between a line spectrum and continuous spectrum, we are going to give the answer in a table form. So if you got this kind of question with 2 marks, I hope you can answer based on the explanation that I've taught you before. This answer scheme is one of the examples how to differentiate continuous spectrum and line spectrum. Let's go to summary for these two. You can see that continuous spectrum can be in a rainbow color screen, while line spectrum got the black background with a specific color for its discrete lines. So for continuous spectrum is forming from white light that goes into the prism and scattered by merging all those wavelengths, while for line spectrum is forming when the light travels through the slits and prism to give a visible part of gas spectrum. So I hope all of you understand how to differentiate between these two spectra. So that's it for this video. Bye!